So welcome everyone. I'm Donna Lalonde and I'm at the ASA, and my job today is to stay out of the way of these wonderful folks. We have 4 amazing panelists, and so I'm going to do a very quick introduction, and then as they are sharing more, I'm sure that they'll share a little bit about their experiences and more about, give maybe a bit more biography. So today we have Monica Jackson from American University, Kelly McConville from Harvard University, Paul Robach from St. Olaf College, and Maria Tackett from Duke University. And we really do want this to be super interactive, but I think that we're going to ask you to hold questions until the end. So while we go through the presentations, if you could mute yourself, that would be wonderful. If there's a thought that you just absolutely don't want to lose while the presentations are going on, feel free to put them in chat, and it will be my job to moderate the chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Monica, who's going to kick us off.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I'm very happy to speak to you all about this topic. It's something that's definitely very near and dear to my heart. For some background, I first got involved in undergraduate research when I was an undergraduate student at Clark Atlanta University as a sophomore. And I participated in a summer research project, and so that really solidified my desire to be. I fell in love with doing research. Come full circle, now I have been on the other side as directing REUs for the past 12 years. And it's kind of my way to give back and try to, inspire students the way that I was inspired when I participated in one. So my role here today, I just want to give you some tips on how, if you're interested in starting an REU and what makes it successful. And Kelly, thank you so much. Is going to be helping me with my slides. So the next one, please. So there are a few different types of research experience programs, and so I'm going to talk to you mainly about summer REUs. So which are definitely generally more involved projects for students. So I'm going to give you 10 tips on how to set one up. So as I mentioned, I've been involved in several REUs. I've established my own REU, and I've been directing 2 other REUs. But the main thing in an REU, of course, is the research. So you have to start with a research project that's feasible, that's interesting, and that you can teach undergraduate students and get it done in a reasonable amount of time. And particularly if you're new to doing this, so if you're a pre-tenure faculty, you're going to want to find a project that's in your research area. So something that will be feasible, something that you kind of have a little head start on, that you know what the solutions will be, because for the students, this will most of them all be brand new. So I do with my REUs, again, most of them run 7 to 8 weeks in the summer, and they're full-time REU. So I have the students for 40 hours a week. And again, this is one model of an REU. There are different models where, say, you meet with them maybe twice a week or something for a couple of hours. But mine is a residential. The ones that I oversee are residential REUs, where I bring students in from across the country. So I have it for a lot of time. So I do what's called these boot camps. And next slide, please. So to get them involved in these boot camps, so mine are always in statistics. The goal is that to get everyone on the same page with statistics. And so generally means I take them through an intense stat course in about 3 weeks. So my field of research is an area called spatial stats, where I look at global trends and data, which it's typically something that's not taught in any basic stat course. It's generally more of an advanced class. So I have to get them ready for that. So with my 3-week process, since I have them for 40 hours a week, here's a model that I have here. So in week 1, I might start with the very basic elementary stat stuff. And then week 2, start doing advanced statistical methods, and then end with my week 3 of my spatial stat. So generally by the end of 3 weeks, I've covered a complete 14-week basic stat course that I would in a regular semester. But again, remember, I have them every day, 40 hours a week. So I'm able to go pretty quickly through the material. I can generally spend like a day on a chapter in a textbook because they're going to be working together on these projects. Next slide, please. The next thing that's really important, so again, the research project's the most important thing, but establish a set agenda beforehand. So you want to figure out how often you're going to meet with them. You know, what's the schedule going to look like? What the deliverables are going to look like? So again, my research area, you saw the maps on the earlier slide. I look at global trends and data. And so this one, the map you're seeing here is looking at mortality rates in the United States. And this is some older data, but we were looking, this is a group that I work with. They were looking to see if cancer mortality rates were higher if you lived near a nuclear plant site. So we're looking at history methods to do that. And so the next slide, please. So here's the example plan that I would give them, you know, so for 1 week, you know, I would tell them we're going to focus on developing some code. The next week we'll learn the stats, you know, for it. Next week we learn to simulate data. So I found with the students, you need to give them a set plan of tasks and details of what they're to work on, so they know what the end goal is to kind of keep them going. Otherwise, you'll find, you know, even like you said, having 8 weeks, 40 hours a week, the time will get by you very quickly. And so setting these intermediate goals for them, make sure that we're all on target, including myself, that we're on target to make sure we get the project done. Next slide, please. The other thing that I'm clear with is if there's going to be a grading system. So I've done research projects during the semester with students. And if I did that, I usually had them as an independent study, you know, for a full 14 weeks. And that there was a grade that I would give them. So, you know, A through F, or maybe some incomplete, or you know, I should be in progress instead of in process. That's one way. In my summer research, they're getting paid to do the research. And so I don't generally give, you know, they don't have credits, they don't have grades. But the grading system might be their payment schedule. So, you know, since I am bringing them in from across the country, I do want to make sure that they are on a set payment schedule so that, you know, they need income. They're undergraduate students. They need to live. You know, I do provide their meals, but I want to make sure they're getting paid regularly. But I do a lot of times hold the last check until they actually had deposited the research project, which is typically just a write-up. And I've never had a problem with the group that did not complete everything on time, and I was able to get the last check on time. But you do have to make sure that you were very clear at the very beginning on what your structure is going to be. Next one, please. I've also found it's very important that I treat the students as colleagues and separate from being a student in class. And that's for their benefit too. So I want to be sure that I'm listening to input. I'm debating ideas with them. I'm flexible with meetings. And what I mean with this, like, I have a set schedule for the students, but I tell them that, you know, I gave you a goal, gave you a task to do. If you didn't complete it, I don't want to have the meeting in there and we don't have anything to talk about. So ask me for additional time or something like that. And that seems to work out well better. And I do have to stress to them that the work I give them, it's not a homework assignment. Again, this is a project. So we're not looking for the right or wrong answer. You know, we're trying to solve a research project. So I need then the students to work together on this. And that comes in handy because when I do give them many projects along the way, I tell them it doesn't matter who gets the answer. You all work together, find out whose strength, you know, is best for the project, and then provide me with that solution. So, you know, so it's very important for them not work alone and not compete with each other and think that they're going to get a grade for every little task that I give them. Next one, please. So I mentioned earlier, so this picture I like. This is my very first REU that I directed. That was at the Sumtree program at University of Miami in Ohio. And my very first group, I love the gentleman that's on the ground there, Doris McDonald. He is now graduates in a PhD program and worked at CDC for a while, and interact with him quite a bit. He's actually come to quite a few joint statistics meetings there. And so the group, with this group, they were my first undergraduate project that I was able to get published in a journal. And the way that we got through for them, I only had 7 weeks. The way we did this, I had to assess each of their strengths, which is very unique. We had one student that was an excellent writer, one that could understand the theory the best, one that was a great communicator. And so in doing that, I ended up finding out what part of the project worked best for each of them. And so, and then also I assigned one of them to be the leader, you know, so it didn't again, I didn't want to treat this like a class. Like I was one telling me what to do. They were peers. I wanted them to figure out which one was leader to kind of keep them going on. So in the end, I was very happy that after the 8 weeks, we were done with the paper. We had to submit it twice to a journal, but we ended up getting it published within a year. Next slide, please. If you're going to do an REU that, again, a summer REU, again, where you're going to have students for a long time, like I said, I mentioned mine's 40 hours a week for the 8 weeks, you're definitely going to have to include some type of field trips and conferences. Otherwise, students, they get burned out very quickly during this research project. So first 2 weeks, everyone's excited, they're meeting each other and everything, but you'll find like by week 4 or so, they're kind of get a little antsy with the work and looking for something, more to do. So I did a lot of field trips. We went to the African American History Museum. Took them to NASA. We always visit the funders. I've been funded by NSA for the most part on my projects, and MAA has actually funded us too. ASA actually funded one of my REs also. So we do have the students interact with their funders, but also the end goal is to take them to a conference where they actually present the work. So here are a few conferences that I've gone to with them. The NAM Math Fest, we've been to SACNAS, the joint stat meetings, and of course the joint math meetings. And generally not all the students go because my REs I have about 12 to 15 students in them, but I maybe bring like 3 or 4 of them to a conference, and we'll go to multiple conferences. A few times during the REU, there's a conference at Princeton, the Conference for African American Researchers in Mathematical Sciences. We have taken a week where the whole group actually went out there, and that's been the best experience when we can do that actually during the REU to do something like that. Next one, please. It's also going to be very important that you seek outside help. REUs can be a lot of work. Like I said, to me, they're a lot of fun, but they are a lot of work. So most of your universities have resources that can help you. And so I've looked for editors. So again, the goal is we're writing a research paper. So I found editors from across the university. We have a university writing center. And so because the students are with AU for the 8 weeks, they can actually have access to all the resources. So I'll send them there to get help write a paper. I actually have a lot of colleagues that actually become co-authors on these publications, and I enlist their help. That's happened a lot because I do bring in speakers for my REU, and they always learn about the student projects. And they're able to critique the projects, but for several times they've ended up staying on with us and helping us with the projects. And sometimes they actually become my technical editors for the paper. Computer programming support, depending on what type of project you're doing, you may want to look to your university to see if they have some training classes. I've done that quite a bit where they took a 1-day class to learn R or something like that. And then of course, other professors on your campus would be useful. Next one, please. The funding is very important. I think you're going to hear a little more about that from the other speakers, but you're definitely going to want to find outside sources for funding or some type of funding for the students. I've had major funding from National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, and other organizations. But because if you're going to do a residential REU, you're going to want to fund the students' housing and their meals. Because again, you want to make sure when they're doing research, they have a place to stay and they're eating. If they don't have one of those, you're not going to get any research out of them. So I do try to take care of all their basic needs so that when they're with me, they can focus on just the research. But you also want to look for internal sources. In my campus, in my office, actually, I have a lot of resources for faculty. I give funding for student faculty research. It's not a whole lot, but I'll give faculty $5,000 that they can use to fund a student to do research. They can use it for a stipend or resources they need to buy. But you also want to look for the informal methods. So again, so I'm an administrator now. I didn't know this when I was a faculty, but you should ask your chair, dean, and provost for money. They do have these little side discretionary accounts that they can sometimes dig into. So don't be afraid to just literally call them up and say, hey, I have this student to do research with, what do you have? So definitely something you can do. Next one, please. And when you're looking for financial support, these are just some things that you want to think about. Again, there's a lot of time running these REUs, so you want to make sure you get some funding out of it, or maybe a course release. Also, if the goal is to publish a paper, then you got to remember sometimes journals cost, or you may have to pay an editor. But you also want to be sure, again, for stat projects, sometimes you have to purchase data, and you got to make sure students all have computers. Although nowadays most students have computers, but you want to make sure that you might want to write that in your grant, just to be on the safe side. And then I mentioned on the previously that it is important to do some type of field trip. So going to conferences, you know, like I mentioned, going to the museum. So put some funding in there for the students so you can make sure you have the funds to get them there. You know, for me, I might rent a shuttle bus, or I'm in DC, so it might be even MARTA fare, or you know, that's the train fare to get them to different places. Next one. And then if you're seeking funding, again, for an RAU, it is important to prioritize publications and presentations. For most RAUs, you're going to do, at minimum, you want to require a report on the project at the end. So some type of written report of what was done, what the results were. But ideally, you should submit it for a publication, you know, in a peer review journal. And that's always the goal at the end of if my REs. It hasn't happened every summer, but it's happened most summers. And then when you're doing this, again, the students actually get to learn the importance of publications, and they're always very excited to actually have a publication. But then you'll start thinking about the details of the order of authors. And again, it depends on the field. If you're publishing in math journals, of course, you know, typically that's alphabetical. Publishing in stat journals, you know, the first author might be most important. The last author is the senior author. And or sometimes like in biostat, the order is based on the contribution. So you want to pay attention to that. Now, because I've gone through the 10-year and I'm full professor and, you know, administrator, for me, I always put myself last. I try to give the students the first, you know, the crucial position in these publications to get their careers going. That's the same way I actually got my career started. That was something that was really important and exciting for me when I got my first publication. Next one, please. And then finally, again, because the goal is to write a paper, make sure that when you handle all the revisions. You know, the student's job is to do the research, write the paper, you know, deposit it with you. And as we all know, to publish a paper, it takes a lot more. You know, it's a back and forth process with the editors, but you should list yourself as a corresponding author so that the editors go back and forth, review the revision, and that you can handle all that. But I learned the hard way before I let them leave to make sure they stay organized the whole time, because there has been a time where we submitted a paper, it was conditionally accepted, I need to make one change, but I could not find any data, I couldn't find their notes, and I basically had to almost start the paper from scratch to get to the tiny revision that should have been a second to do. So before I actually do give them their final checks, part of my checklist is that, can I find everything that you all worked on? So those are my tips, I think, for establishing an RAU, and I hope that you can find some of them helpful. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Monica. And I think now we're going to go to Kelly McConville. And so Kelly, you're in charge.
Great, wonderful. Okay. So I was tasked with talking about funding and then course-based research. I'll talk a little bit also about summer, in part just to contrast that with course-based research. But let's start with funding. So I think the good place to start is with your own institution. So look at what internal funds exist there. And typically it seems like there's a lot more internal funds for students than there are for faculty. So that's worth noting when you're trying to think about funding this experience. And this is more thinking about the summer, right? So during the school year, as Monica said, oftentimes it's that students are just getting course credit for it. A good office to be familiar with is the development office. So often they can work with donors to sort of think about, creating those pockets of money. Stats and data science are pretty hot and exciting to donors these days. And so, having the people in that office know who you are to help pitch ideas to potential donors is a good idea. Also recognizing that students' federal work study can be applied to them doing research with you during the school year. So that could be a way for you to get funding for the students. In terms of getting funding more globally for yourself or, for summer projects, that's where working with your office for sponsored programs is a good place to go. So I spent the last 10-ish years of my career at a liberal arts college, but all of those places, even if it was a small office, had an office for sponsored programs, and we're trying to, maybe beef up those offices too, give the faculty more resources, and really try to help them understand, okay, what are you interested in? I can try to really search out projects that are related to what you're interested in doing. So I listed kind of the 3 most usual suspects in terms of national grants there, but I would say work with that office for sponsored programs to get a sense of the projects or grants that you wouldn't think of, because there are lots of different pockets of money out there that aren't just coming from NSF or NIH. So for example, most of my research is funded by the US Forest Service. And so, I just get these small contracts with them to fund summer salary, and then also student funding, student stipends, and some travel support. But I think also local businesses is a great way to go. But I would really stress that for a lot of those more small boutique style, it's not just part of their funding pipeline. You got to be ready to network. And as a person who refused to be a Girl Scout because I didn't want to have to sell something, even though everyone loves Girl Scout cookies, I have not felt that great trying to network for money. But that's where you have people on your campus who are probably better at it than at least Kelly is, that can help you do that. And one thing I'll say here, at least from my own experiences with the Forest Service, is for the first few years that I was working with them, they weren't funding us. I was working with them sort of during the school year on projects that were related to independent studies. And they got really jazzed about what the students could do and really surprised that undergraduates could do so much. So they sort of had this perception that you couldn't work with their data unless you were a graduate student or a postdoc. And we, broke down that myth for them. And then they got pretty excited. And they would say that the size of the grants they're throwing in my direction are way smaller than the ones they're sending to, sort of the bigger labs. And so you might have to first give a little proof of concept to these groups, but then after a while, they might be more interested in providing financial support. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk about is course-based undergraduate research. And so this is often can be sort of a capstone class in your curriculum. Definitely make sure it counts towards your major to incentivize students to take it. But when I think about the contrast between, taking a class, which is a research-based class, versus the summer experience, is it often ends up with 2 different bodies of students. So those summer experiences can be very competitive to get into. It can end up being sort of the students with those really shiny resumes and GPAs. And I'm not saying those shouldn't be the students that get those experiences, but I think what's lovely about these course-based experiences is it really is open to all students. You should still have a small-ish class because they're often very writing intensive, and the projects, you're going to have trouble managing a certain number of projects. But I think this is a lovely model that it really does open it up for students. And since a lot of research has shown that retention, especially among underrepresented minorities, research can be a great way of including retention. Making sure we're opening these opportunities more broadly is a really good thing. The problem is that I think a lot of students assume that undergraduate research isn't for them, right? They sort of go into it saying, well, I'm not planning to go to graduate school. I don't know what research is, so I'll go do this internship or I'll take this other class. And so it's really important to give students concrete ideas of the value of it. Okay, you'll get to practice your communication skills. You'll get to, interact more closely with a faculty mentor. You'll get to pick up some things around the practice of statistics that you haven't necessarily gotten to in your other classes. And you have to make sure you're selling that, not just to the people who are already on board. So, often I'll see that folks will sell their undergraduate research experiences at the departmental seminar, but not all students go to your departmental seminar. So making sure you're talking about this in the classes that are real feeder classes for all the students of your major. And yeah, just talking about that value and from a lot of different modes of how it's valuable. And I love how Monica started by talking about how useful it was for her, because I think for students, they really connect to that, to sort of see that you didn't know what it was beforehand, and it really helped you understand your career trajectory. So I think when I first decided to teach one of these research-based courses, I was like, I love teaching my students about statistical methods and writing formulas on the board. I have no idea how to teach them to communicate and to write. And so that part of the course terrified me. So I didn't know that Sarah would be in the audience, but I just want to tip my hat to Sarah and Deb for writing a book that I think was really needed in this sphere, because there are lots of books about how to teach methods, but I don't think there are lots of books about how to teach communication. And so check it out. It's a really useful book. I used it in the capstone course that I taught, and it can help all along the way of effectively reading articles, writing all about the different pieces, how to communicate through code. So yeah, really, really useful. Has also lots of nice activities that you can fold into your course. Okay, so folding it into your teaching responsibility. So I think this is another argument for the course-based model over maybe the summer model. Now, Paul will give us some advice on how to find time to do research with students, right? To add that thing onto your schedule. But I will say, when a group of us, we surveyed undergraduate stats instructors and asked, okay, well, what are your barriers to participating in mentoring undergraduate research? Our number one, by far, most common barrier was just people finding the time. And I think then just folding it into your teaching responsibilities. So whatever your teaching load is, making one of those courses be a research experience is a way of actually getting credit or finding that time. In terms of projects, so for this, I reached out to the faculty and staff at my institution, and I think that has lots of great benefits. First, it gets those people jazzed to get to know you, and jazzed that you're on their campus, and makes you them allies to you, which is great. But the one caveat I'd put on this is, I think a good bulk of the work for a class like this is before the semester even starts then, because you really have to spend quite a bit of time, drumming up those projects, getting them ready so that once you have those 13, 14 weeks, you can actually hit the ground running from day one. One other thing I guess I'll mention is I put the OctoCat up in the corner of the slide, and then I haven't talked about it, but I do think a lovely thing about classes like this is you really do get the students experience practicing statistics. So, my students are learning to use Git and GitHub. And I think, for whether they're going to go into academia or industry, this is a really good skills to be developing. So giving them, practice and actual implementation of statistics is useful. Okay, so I just want to contrast that a little bit with my summer research. So I've been doing summer research with students for a while now. That's usually an 8 to 10 week period. I don't love that most of the institutions I've worked for would fund the students and not fund the faculty, because it's a really intensive experience, and you're cutting out time you could be spending doing other things to work with students. And so it's really important that you try to speak out funding for yourself too. I think, I wish that would be something that could change. I think a lot of our institutions like to talk at great lengths about how much they value undergraduate research. But I think then they have to also be supporting it from the faculty perspective too. So make sure you're seeking out funding from some of those sources I talked about, and feel free to email me if you want to brainstorm some things there. Just a couple of quick notes. So I assign my students all to 2 projects, and I do this because sometimes research doesn't work, right? You sort of just can't get things going. Or, as Monica was saying, the students get antsy after a few weeks in doing the same thing. So if they have 2 projects, it allows them to kind of pivot, maybe feel a little bit refreshment just going to the second project. So yeah, I found that was really helpful. And even though it usually meant that a student kind of had a primary project and then they were secondary on a different project, I thought that was still a good thing. And yeah, just allowed us to get over the fact that some of them might just not end up in anything super productive. I would say frequent presentations. So I have my students do lots of different layers of presentations here. I have them present to each other on things that they've learned along the way. They present frequently to the Forest Service. So this has been since before we got funded to us getting funded. And I do think that was part of why they decided to start funding us, is because they, really liked all that interaction they were having with the students. And then having concrete deliverables, but I've learned over time to define this more broadly than just publication. So I've had my students make dashboards, software packages, even sometimes just a GitHub repo that has a whole bunch of useful code. They'll write technical reports sometimes that get published in Forest Service publications. So not all projects get to end in a publication, but find ways that they can still end with a concrete deliverable that they can put on their resume and feel like they made progress on. And I'm not going to talk through that graphic at the bottom necessarily, but I do give my students this, and we do kind of talk through the different stages, so that, again, I think we don't want to just assume that students know what research means, and research means a lot of different things even to us 4 panelists. So, really giving them a concrete idea of what their day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month structure will look like, I think is very useful. All right, with that, I shall hand it over to Paul, so I shall stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Kelly. And Paul, you're up.
Let's see. All right. Is my screen appearing? Okay.
It is.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kelly and Donna, and it was I was really excited to be asked to be part of this panel, and actually just really excited to spend time with a bunch of folks that are enthusiastic about undergraduate research and a chance to kind of learn some stuff myself, hopefully. So I was asked to talk about finding time to mentor undergraduate research, and so I'll try to offer a few thoughts here in the next 10 minutes or so. So finding time is really easy, right? Here it is. Every day is a Saturday, and academics can work on Saturdays. So that's not where I'm going. I'm going to try to talk about finding time to mentor undergraduate research and still maintain that work-life balance. So anyway, just a little bit of context on me. I'm coming to you from snowy Northfield, Minnesota. I teach at a small liberal arts school. Statistics isn't even a major here. Statistics and data science is a concentration. So I have the students I work with tend to have chosen to add this concentration to one of many majors. We get majors from all over the campus, which is super cool. And we get a lot of them, which is also super cool. And then I've got 5 wonderful colleagues in stats and data science to kind of bounce ideas around with. So that's the context I'm coming from. So I'm kind of thinking about this. I was thinking about early in my career, what did working with undergraduates look like when I first kind of started teaching? And for me, it kind of had this ad hoc drop-in feel where people were excited when they found out there's a statistician on campus. Faculty members would drop by, staff members, faculty would send their students over to talk to me. I get students from within our department to come talk to me. And so I found myself kind of doing a lot of kind of one-off mentoring for kind of student initiated project, which was good. I got to know some students really well. Some of them had some really interesting things they wanted to look into. So I had that kind of going on. I as a lot of us do, I was still trying to continue some work in my dissertation, but struggling to kind of figure out where to plug in undergraduates into that. And so kind of reflecting on that, there's a couple of issues with I think with kind of that approach. And the word that came to mind to me was reactive. I was just kind of reacting to people that came in my door, and that was kind of the projects that I ended up working on, and I guess there's some implications to that. One is that I think the number of students that I was able to impact was fairly minimal. It was kind of one at a time, and students that approached me, and so I thought there's room there, right, to potentially be able to impact and work with more students. Because one of the time costs here is that you have to train students. It's not just about kind of solving the problem, right? It's kind of teaching students, how to do research, how to be a collaborator, right? And when you're kind of doing this one at a time, that's a lot of training effort just to get to the problem. And I wasn't really choosing or being systematic about how I chose my projects. And so early in my career, some of these projects, they just weren't destined to be publishable. They weren't necessarily of high interest, to me. So anyway, so I was hoping to find a different way, or find another way to kind of conduct undergraduate research, mentor undergraduate research, and maybe do it in a way that addressed some of these issues. So when I got to St. Olaf, I was super fortunate. Kind of the year I got here, Julie Legler, Matt Ritchie, and I, put together a grant, and we started something we call the Center for Interdisciplinary Research. And so I'm going to describe this to you. I'm not throwing this out there as kind of this one size fits all, everyone should do this kind of thing, but it's kind of worked for us at St. Olaf, and I think there might be like pieces of this that you might see that might work in your situation. So that's why I'm going to kind of describe this to you. And so what this CIR is kind of this. It's a center where statistics is kind of this common ground for engaging in student faculty interdisciplinary research. Students apply to be part of this program. We take about 20 students a year. They work with us throughout the academic years. This is kind of academic year research. Students get kind of a half credit per semester, so there's credit for them. And there's kind of two prongs to this. On one hand, there's a weekly seminar series. So all 20 students come together once a week, and we talk about how to be a good consultant, how to communicate things. We talk about ethical issues. We talk about statistical careers. And so this is where a lot of that common training kind of is going on. And then in addition to that, there are several of these interdisciplinary research teams going on, kind of headed by, there's a domain expert, often a faculty member in another department that's doing some quantitative research. They're bringing in the research question. There's a stats mentor that's part of this team. And then typically 3-ish students, three, I don't know, seems to have been a sweet spot for us, but 3-ish students kind of on each team. And so that's kind of the general setup to this program. And so when I kind of started thinking about, oh, and then I could go on, I could give you the story of the humble origins. We actually literally started kind of in a broom closet with a little paint on the walls and a computer, and now we have kind of this devoted center at the college, which is super nice. But so we've had this going since 2004. But anyway, I want to talk about kind of why this model, or what have been kind of the advantages to a model like this, and why you might think about incorporating some elements of this kind of model. So one was just this ability to impact more students, right? And so just kind of teams of 3, maybe some years mentoring multiple projects. They're just a chance to kind of impact more students than kind of doing these kind of the one-off projects that I started with. One really nice thing is people still like to know there's a statistician on campus, a friendly statistician. They still come by with data related questions, and it's kind of really nice to say, like, that's a really good question. Why don't we see about turning that into a CIR project next year and having some students devoted to your question? And so it takes a little bit of the pressure off me to kind of answer everything, but we do, I think, service a lot of kind of faculty members and even kind of staff offices around campus. The training is all kind of done together, right? It's not one-off anymore. There's 20 students kind of being trained together. I think we train them as researchers and collaborators and communicators, and I think they feed off each other and learn from each other. And so that's been really powerful, I think. We kind of like this model where we kind of stretch things over the whole academic year instead of, I think there's pros and cons to, like, a condensed summer or condensed semester, but here, we really want time for students to engage in the background research in their subject area, right? To be able to kind of explore new methods, to really focus on a really high quality, communication of their result at the end. And so we're kind of able to do that with an academic year time frame. This took a while to happen, but we get credit for our efforts, right? This is super important. So the director of the CIR gets basically a course credit for running the seminar series, for, as Kelly said, finding all the projects, coordinating all the projects kind of before the year starts. And then we kind of have a rotating research credit. So once you've mentored kind of enough projects, right, that's kind of equal to a course. And so we're able to kind of free that up. So I think, there's been opportunities to publish. I think we try to get, especially some of our younger faculty members that are, where they're thinking about tenure, we're able to kind of put them on projects where there's, maybe a good chance that this thing is, might lead to a publication with undergraduates. And so I've published in, like, I don't know, political science and health economics and genetics and paleoceanography and things that kind of the whole reason I got into statistics. I get to play in everyone else's backyard, and it's been a blast. And then by working with, like, admissions and development, I think we've created a lot of goodwill for statistics on campus, which can't be understated. So it's not all faculty domain experts, but those are some really good projects that come out of some of those other areas. The team environment, I think is important. And I think you are able to kind of bring together a team of different strengths. And I think this has been a chance to get, students with different kinds of preparation and students that may be a little bit underprepared, kind of get them to be, kind of a important member of these research teams. And there's it's kind of been this self-perpetuating statistics research community. We send CIR students into intro classes to talk about the work they're doing and just kind of drum up some enthusiasm. So that's kind of why we've developed this model and kind of stayed with this model over the years. It's not perfect. There are some challenges. Here's a couple of challenges that came to mind. There was definitely sweat equity at the beginning. We didn't get those course releases from the beginning. I think Julie and I were doing like 2-3 projects per year kind of thing at the beginning. And eventually, once we kind of had this proof of concept, we were able to kind of convince the powers that be that it was worth, what we were doing was kind of worth the course release. So there was some sweat equity at the beginning. tenure and promotion, I think, this is important. I think I feel very fortunate. I'm in a department where our statement on scholarly activity specifically addresses the value of undergraduate research. It specifically addresses the value of like a joint applied publication, in another field, and so which kind of dovetails nicely with the work we do in the CIR. Funding. Kelly just got done telling you about lots of places to find funding, and so we started off with NSF funds for this, and once that grant expired, we kind of had kind of a record of success, and the development office was able to convince alumni to, hey, we got this center, it's got this good track record, and they've been able to kind of fund travel for students and speakers to bring in and that kind of thing. One thing, I've really, I'm really kind of embraced this kind of scholarship that's applied and interdisciplinary and collaborative, and that's kind of what comes out of the CIR. I mean, I've had a chance to kind of work on some of my own stuff in summers, but that kind of scholarship is super exciting to me. I love the collaborative part of it, and that's kind of what this kind of thing promotes. And then we've tried even some exceptional sophomores in this program, and I don't know if it's just like maturity, preparedness, but it really has worked best. We found kind of with juniors and seniors. All right, so just kind of a few challenges with this model. So anyway, my thought was just kind of give you this as just kind of food for thought, something that's worked for us. Hopefully, there's elements that you see in this that you may consider using. I'd love to chat about this either in the Q&A or reach out to me, my email address there. We wrote a paper on this, kind of about a decade ago, and the core elements are kind of still in place. That was in the American Statistician, so there's a reference to that. And then I just leave you with St. Olaf. Music is so important at St. Olaf. This is a Dear Data exercise that we do in CIR, and some of you have probably done things like this, but this is one student's week in communicating with others around campus, written musically. So I just wanted to leave you with that. So thanks everybody, and I look forward to getting questions in the Q&A.
Thanks very much, Paul. And Maria, we will turn it over to you. And yes, we will make the slides available. And we also have started to develop a resource repository. And the article that Paul just mentioned is included in that repository. So we'll share that at the end.
Thanks. Well, hi, I'm Maria Tackett, and I'm an assistant professor of the practice and statistics at Duke. And I've been asked to talk about creating productive experiences and sharing student work. And actually some of the things that I'm going to talk about, Monica, Kelly, and Paul have hit on. So I'll try to highlight things or reiterate things based on their previous presentations. But first, I just wanted to just kind of orient and give you an idea of the types of research experiences that I've mentored. And when Paul said ad hoc, as I thought about this list, I was like, oh, maybe this feels a little ad hoc perhaps. But the first type, is just like that independent, that student-driven research where a student's interested in, maybe like a senior thesis project or an independent study. And so really the role of the mentor is not necessarily to drive the agenda, but more so to support that student in their research, typically, lasting like a semester or a year during the academic year. The next is a project I've done in sort of 2 iterations that we've called Duke Shiny Ed. This is a project developing interactive learning apps using R Shiny, modeled after the BOAST program led by Dennis Pearl at Penn State. And so the first iteration of this, we had 4 students developing apps over 6 weeks during summer 2020. And then the second iteration, 3 students were continuing to develop the apps and prepare them for classroom use and for experiments during a semester. During the summer session, we had a project manager, and I'll actually talk about the project manager role a little bit later on. And then this third project is a project I've worked on for a couple of years in collaboration with a colleague in the Duke Institute for Brain Sciences, looking at the interaction between mental health and healthcare utilization and interactions with the criminal justice system in Durham County. And I would say this team runs most closely to like a traditional lab setting or the center that Paul just described, where we have a team of about 3 to 7 students. We currently have 7 students. This project, students are on the team for a full calendar year. So they actually start during the summer and continue on through the full academic year with the opportunity to continue. So we have students now who've been on the team for a couple of years. And so really, I just wanted to sort of orient just all the different types of research experiences in addition to the types that we've heard from the previous speakers. And as I was kind of reflecting on this, a couple of things that actually kind of tie these projects together. One is that they've included students from actually all stages of the statistics curriculum, from students who've had an intro class and to the more advanced senior students. And I think that's in part because I've sort of played a little loose with the definition of research here, where what I'm including is more traditional research, but also things like Duke Shiny Ed. The students are developing like a tangible learning app product, not necessarily conducting research. And then the other thing, as I think about sort of the tips that I'll share, is most of my mentorship experience has been impacted by the pandemic. And so a lot of the things I've thought about in creating these experiences are creating them for remote, hybrid, asynchronous, sort of all these flexible different types of environments. But now I'll just share a few ideas for creating productive experiences. And so I think Monica mentioned this in her talk. It's just getting started, and Kelly as well, like before the experience starts. So whether that's preparing before the semester, but even things that feel like they shouldn't take that much time, like getting the data, if it's from a third party, getting students added to an IRB, just getting all those sort of administrative details done so that students are ready to go from day one. The other thing I've found useful is for some students, providing maybe some coding tutorials or maybe some quick statistical review that, some light prep work that they can do beforehand, again, sort of in preparation, so that they're really ready to get running from the first day. So then the second one, is just working with students to develop those long and short-term goals. So for the semester-long projects, we actually start by making sort of the long-term, what do we hope to achieve by the end of the semester? And then we really break those down into, what are some milestones we want to hit every 3 to 4 weeks. And really, I'll just kind of reiterate for this piece, the idea of collaborating with the students in developing these goals. As Monica mentioned, this is not a class. This is like a research. So really, getting students to get ownership of the project and developing those goals and sort of, remind them that they are colleagues as necessary in this research setting. Meeting regularly and leaving each meeting with clear tasks. So for semester-long projects, we meet about once a week. And then for shorter term projects, 2 to 3 times a week. And again, spending the last like 5 to 10 minutes of each hour-long meeting, really sort of laying out, what are the clear steps or what are the clear things that we want to achieve before we meet next, and what students can present at that next meeting. And then I guess I'll spend a little time on this, is encouraging students to regularly document and reflect on the research experience. So one thing that I encourage students to do is to keep a research journal. And so this is something, where students can jot down ideas, jot down reflections on just what it's like to do research, jot down areas where maybe they're hitting roadblocks. And I tell students, that it's like a journal, it's like your private space. So it's really just an opportunity for them to reflect. For students that do work with me for like course credit, I do, as part of their final deliverable, have them write a reflection on the research experience. Again, just really getting them to think about, sort of like what just happened over the course of the semester and how that's impacted the way they feel about statistics and conducting research and being part of the research community. For some of the shorter projects, other things I've done are daily check-ins. So during the summer, we were working remotely. And so each morning, students, or well, really for their morning, because the students were on different time zones, students would write one sentence of what they hoped to achieve that day. and when they finished, one sentence of what they got done that day and maybe any questions or roadblocks. And it's just a nice way to kind of, again, keep regular communication in asynchronous or remote work, but also for some nice daily accountability. It was also really helpful for students to realize that, that if you make these goals, but then you hit these roadblocks, like that's just a natural part of research that everyone experiences, because at some point everyone had at least, one day or multiple days of, oh, I want to achieve all these things. And I got the first one done because I got stuck debugging code all day. And then the last one that I found really helpful are collaborative meeting notes. So for team projects, in particular, having like a running Google Doc where we have like someone take turns just sort of jotting down the notes from that meeting, or if students find resources or want to share, code tutorials or that sort of thing. It's just a nice sort of running document for what's going on. Just a few things that are, specific to team experiences. So creating opportunities for students to work together. So Paul mentioned that the students in his center work in like research teams of 3 to 4 students. And that's a really nice way just to, one, take a little bit of the burden off the faculty, because eventually students get used to going to each other for questions first, instead of always sort of using the faculty as the first go-to. I'm also using some sort of software for quick team communication. So I use Slack, but something like Microsoft Teams or similar software. And I think really the sort of key piece here is something that almost functions like a chat room that feels informal, so that students feel comfortable. If it's, the middle of the week, they have an issue, they can just send a quick message instead of sitting on that until the next team meeting. And I do emphasize like the kind of chat like feature, because sometimes emails feel like this big formal thing. And so this just encourages some communication. And then the project manager. So I had a project manager for my summer 2020 project, and I have a project manager working with me on the sort of collaborative project and on the mental health and the justice system. And the project manager is typically like a grad student. So we've had PhD or master's students. It could actually be an experienced undergraduate if you have an undergraduate student who's done a lot of research. And really they're there to be like the go-between, again, to relieve some of that burden from the faculty. And so one thing our project manager does now for our year-long project is she leads a once-a-week student-only team meeting. So from the faculty perspective, I only need to attend a meeting once a week, but then the students basically have 2 set meeting times a week. So they're getting that regular contact. And during these student-only meetings, it's assisting with skill development, maybe a quick review on some sort of modeling technique or something, answering questions. And then the project manager also can help out with administrative tasks. And then kind of the last piece for the, effective experiences is building diverse research teams. And so this is diverse as far as like identity, background, but also, diverse teams in terms of academic interest and experience. And really this just helps, create like just really rich discussions, because students are coming at these problems from a lot of different perspectives. And so I've just found the learning experience, I think, more valuable when you've got a lot of different voices on the team. So then really quickly, just some ideas for sharing student work. A lot of these have been mentioned before, creating a public facing product. So here's screenshots of a Shiny app that a student developed that's used by local legal professionals in Durham. Sharing updates with stakeholders. So this, the kind of subject matter experts, but also too, maybe community stakeholders. So for our project on mental health and the criminal justice system, we actually meet with people in the community who work with people who've been released from jail. And then also to co-authoring publications. And for some projects, you can really get kind of all 3. So for one of our projects, we have our stakeholder meetings and we write the stakeholders a report, and we're also writing academic publications. And so that's also a good opportunity to get students to think about what it's like to write for different audiences and how that translates. And then finally, I'll leave you with some conferences. So there's competitions such as the undergraduate statistics project competition sponsored by CAUSE and ASA. And so students can submit their work to that for the opportunity to win prizes and also present their work. But then also too, presenting their work at conferences. So there's the Electronic Undergraduate Statistics Research Conference. There's other conferences aimed specifically at undergraduate research. But a lot of the conferences, sponsored by ASA, have lightning or poster sessions, and they do encourage students to present their work. And so presenting a poster at the symposium on data science and statistics is a nice way for students to interact with the statistics community, but also an opportunity to share their work. Great, so thank you very much. Thank you, Donna and Kelly, for the invitation to be on the panel, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks very much, Maria, and to all of our panelists. And I just put a link to the resource repository in the chat, which we hope will be a dynamic document. So please do feel free to share resources that you come across with me, and we'll get them added. But that's also where we'll link the recording and the slides. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions, and please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. And we have about 30 minutes for some Q&A. I guess if you want, there's also the raise hand if that's more comfortable and I can call on folks, but.
How about maybe some advice in starting conversations with faculty from other departments to get them to be organized enough to provide prospective projects for students? Because, I'm new, this is my second year, I haven't met a lot of faculty, but every time I ask for like data or something, they're like, that would be great. And then that's the end of the conversation. So any advice there?
Maybe Paul, do you want to start and then?
Sure, I can try. Yeah, that's I've had a lot of success with kind of the whole like cup of coffee, right? It's kind of like just you hear there's a new faculty member, and they're kind of quantitative, and new faculty members love to talk about their research. So just kind of get them going, right? And just kind of hear what they have going. Kind of describe what we have kind of opportunities we have to kind of plug in, I think, of course by now we have some, talk to so-and-so down the hall, they worked with us, 5 years ago, and there's a lot of kind of, kind of positive experiences, people that, like in history, that never thought, right, that data would come to bear on their projects. And so kind of had kind of success with that, but I think what encourages a lot of people is kind of this bang for their buck in terms of their time. I think it's kind of like, they're basically, we're asking them to kind of meet with our students once a week in these meetings, and then hopefully it's going to kind of propel their research along. And there's some startup time, getting things organized, but a lot of folks are like, okay, I'm willing to give that a shot. You're right, with 1 hour a week, right? And I'm hearing other people got some positive payoff. I'm going to give this a shot. So.
Yeah, I was going to add on to what Paul said. I think the easiest thing is like, tie it to their research. Like you said, faculty love to talk about their research. So I think you got to lead with that, and then show them how getting involved, say within REU undergraduate research, that it could somehow help propel their research or spread the knowledge about their research. You've all heard of saying that getting faculty together is like herding cats, so you will have to go back to them, and because if it's something that's important to you, I think if you go back and keep talking to them, they'll realize that and contribute. And then some faculty, like I said, are not going to be interested in. So I do think doing undergraduate research, you have to find faculty that are kind of committed to this type of work, because it is a different type of research. I think one of the speakers mentioned that it's training too. It's not just doing the research, but you have to teach the students actually how to do the research as well.
I'll just add quickly that when I teach that course-based research class, I have the potential sponsors give me essentially a 2-pager that has a couple of paragraphs of a prompt, has a code book and a data set. And it's true that some people show interest and never follow through with that. I guess that's just part of it, but that is really important, like as a first step for me to then, I read over it, sort of talk them through what I think the students could potentially manage in a semester. So having some very concrete deliverable you want from them to get the conversation going can be really useful. And then I would have them, participate in, the students would give them 5 presentation updates throughout the semester. So they, and that was the only time that they had to engage with. So only 5 meetings during a semester didn't feel like too much of a startup for most of them.
Sarah, please jump in.
There we go. Okay. I'm wondering if you have any advice for scoping projects. I feel like even for myself, I can never predict how long something's going to take me to do. And then thinking about doing that for students, especially when you're trying to tie it to your own research, which also feels unknown. Like, any tips for identifying the good first project that you bring to the table? Like, what should I be thinking about?
Yeah, and start. I guess that's why I always say, like, the first research project has to be something that's in your area that you kind of know well. It's kind of cheating a little bit because you got to kind of know where it's going to go. I've done REUs before where I let the students pick the project, because, that was exciting for me. I started from scratch, and sometimes it went, well, but then other times in stat, once we got the data, there was nothing there, nothing at all to salvage from that. And we had to figure out a way to keep going. But early on, I kept my project very, very close to what my current publications were and what I knew. And even I had some projects that I may have started before the students. I started working with the students, so projects that I knew were nearly done, and they did the very last leg of it. But it can be tricky, as you know, in stats. I think it's not predictable always what's going to happen, but you do want to make sure, especially if you're early on doing this, that you are getting something out of this, and again, as a new faculty member, you're going to want to get publications out of it. After you get further along in career, you can take these risks, I think, a little more and not have to worry about that so much.
And if I can follow up, I think the like in a lot of ways, the ideal project has a lot of different kind of points along, right? There's maybe like a grand goal, right? In a perfect world, you'd kind of get this far, but if you could accomplish kind of these little sub goals, right, that would still make the faculty member, or your partner happy and feel like they're moving their research along. So I think that's kind of part of it. And and sometimes, boy, the whole like what tools do you end up using is kind of a tricky thing. For me, it was kind of freeing. I don't know. I never took a course like in multi-level modeling, and then like some of my early CIR projects involved multi-level modeling, and so I had to get up to speed and help the students get up to speed, and ended up writing a book on it, right? You know what I mean? And it's just like nothing I ever like thought I would know about.
So I just threw into the chat the sort of ad I had for my students, but about halfway through that page, it lists the 4 projects we'll be doing this summer. And you don't have to look at them closely, but just notes I would make about them is they have different flavors. So in terms of how much the students need to have in terms of statistical background, computing background. So I think that really helps. I totally agree with Monica that the closer it is to your own research, the more successful it will be. But one thing that isn't helpful for someone who's as more new in their career, but as you go on, like I just start a file that's like, okay, this would be a great project for an undergraduate research, or, I've started on something and I'm like, I'm just going to put this in the list because, you know, I can feel that it has a nice structure to it. It's not really open-ended. The like intermediate steps are really clear. Like Paul said, there's lots of on-ramps that can still be considered success, or off-ramps that are still considered success. But then, yeah, just having a range of potential projects, especially if you don't know beforehand what the background of your students will be, so you can then start doing some of that tailoring that folks were talking about.
Maria, I wondered, do you want to say a little bit more about Duke Shiny Ed? Because you said in your presentation, you loosely defined research, and that was maybe a place where the project was a bit easier to describe, and you had a good sense of beginning and end.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, so that one, you know, there's a really clear deliverable for the students. Each student developed a Shiny app by the end. And so, you know, kind of starting with that in mind, I kind of worked backwards to think about, you know, what might be achievable. And we were doing this very quickly, like 6 weeks. An interesting thing about that project is I found the students actually worked a little faster than I was expecting. I think that was partially an artifact of people being stuck at home. This was summer 2020. So we actually, you know, got to do a little bit more. They got a little further than what I had previously expected. But I think that was actually a good start. So actually the very first project I mentored was the another app project. Where a student developed an app for the law school. And I think having that really concrete deliverable really helped kind of scope the work. And, you know, as someone mentioned, having those sort of intermediate milestones and maybe even presenting those to students is like, hey, here are the things we're going to achieve, so that even if you don't make it to that grand, you know, the grand goal at the end, it still feels like, oh yeah, we actually got all these other things accomplished.
Thanks. Jillian, please.
Hi, yeah, so I have a question. How do you balance the different, when you're working with groups of students and the different working loads, particularly the student that is overzealous and seems to complete nearly all of the work before their partners get to doing what they want to do? How can you, I don't know, balance that workload?
I can start. So I've had that happen quite a bit. So I do form teams with my RU, and as I mentioned, I look for the strength in each of the teams. And a lot of times, like I said, not all the students they're not going to have the same strength. So generally, someone's going to stand out and have different skill set than the other. So I've learned to utilize that. So if I have that one that's constantly getting, you know, all these assignments done quickly, then I'll turn around and have them teach the other students, you know, the work that was being done. But I've also found out, say that one student is good with the, you know, with the program or computation. When it gets to the writing part, they're going to be probably a little bit weaker, or there's going to be something else that other students are going to be better. And so I do try to find out, you know, what their skill sets are. Keep it going. And I stress, I do try to make sure that we don't, you know, I don't treat this in like a regular class. Like I make, you know, I tell them they are colleagues, they are a team. The goal is to get the project done, you know, so to lean on each other for this, because when we go to present the project, you know, you can't point fingers at people. Everyone's going to have to learn, you know the work. All your names are going to be on the publications. But I have learned to, like I said, to utilize those individual strengths that stand out quickly with the students to get the products going. I don't know if anyone else has tried something else when that happens.
Yeah, I think in some ways we let students at the beginning at least kind of self-organize, and usually at the beginning they're like so overwhelmed, right, that it would be like impossible for kind of one person to kind of do everything, as they kind of try to feel their way into the project. And then I think what we end up doing is you know, partway through, early on, we kind of have like individual meetings with the students and kind of ask them kind of these questions like what do you see as your role, right? Are you happy with that, right? How are you guys functioning as a team? You know, maybe a little encouragement like, hey, you got some really good ideas. We would love to hear from you more in our weekly meetings. And so so kind of doing that early on, those individual check-ins, I think has, I don't know, for us been a decently effective way.
One small thing, when I teach that course-based undergraduate research project class, I have them give me updates each week, and we rotate who's the team leader each week, and they're the person who has to report to me. So that overly zealous person doesn't get to be the person reporting every single week, only once every 3 weeks. And I think that really helps the other students start to feel ownership, because they're going to have to report for the whole group. And it might feel a little awkward because we're all sitting there in the same space. And so then this one person's in charge of, and so, you know, we'll ask follow-ups and then other people can engage, but they're really supposed to be taking the lead, both in terms of reporting to me and assigning tasks for the students that week. So it rotates, but I think that also helps them to be able to feel like, okay, well, it's my turn to decide what we're supposed to do this week and who should be doing which of the pieces of the project.
One thing we've done is, you know, and within like a team of 3 to 4 students, kind of make each student in charge, or like be the owner of one piece of the project. So for example, we're working on modeling right now for a paper. And so one student, you know, he's like kind of in charge of the model. One student, she's like in charge of the exploratory data analysis and sort of that piece. And then we have another student who, you know, has less statistics experience. She's also getting writing credit. So she's really in charge of like the introduction and the lit review. And then she'll kind of drive a lot of the writing to, you know, thinking about the interpretation. So they all are working together and are in the know and sort of like collaborating, but they're also kind of working in parallel, and they have their piece that they own.
I think we have time for one more question, if there are other questions. Or if not, I might go around to the panelists and sort of and say, you know, if you had to summarize your best advice in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever, what's the one takeaway you want our colleagues to leave with?
I would say definitely have fun with doing this. I've really enjoyed doing undergraduate research, and it's, like I said, it's become a true passion of mine. So just seeing students just learn about research again for the first time, because it is new for them. But also something one of the other speakers, I think it was Kelly, you had said, do talk to your universities about you getting something from this, because you could be doing something else, you know, because even though it is fun, it is your time. And so you definitely should be asking for course releases or funding or something. So don't just give all of everything away into this.
So I'll just piggyback off of that and say, if you've not talked to someone in your office for sponsored programs, that should be your goal this week, is to set up a one-on-one meeting with them and say, these are the keywords you should search for in grant calls and fellowship calls, and have them help you find resources for funding. So to me, that's the tangible thing to take away, is to talk to those people. They want to talk to you. They'll be excited that you reached out to them. And that's their job, is to help you find this kind of funding.
Yeah, I'll just say maybe like 2 quick things. I think the first is just like go for it. So I had been thinking about, you know, mentoring undergraduate research for a while and was kind of scared to do it. And then just like a student approached me and I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to do this. And since then, you know, it's kind of snowballed from there. So definitely just try it. And then, you know, kind of, again, sort of piggybacking on the idea of like not giving away your time for free, understanding what actually counts in your department. So like we have the nuance where if a student signs up for independent study, that counts. But if it's like paid, like I pay them research, like that kind of doesn't count in the same way. So, you know, really kind of understanding, you know, what are the nuances to what counts and what doesn't count, so that you're, you know, getting the full credit and benefit of what you're doing.
Yeah, there seems to be a common theme going. Yeah, I'd say number one, yeah, just do it, right? For me, this is, you know, I know it's a time imposition, but man, this has been, the undergraduate research has been so energizing to me, just the projects and working with the students. And yes, yet it is good, right, to kind of fit it in with everything and have that work-life balance for it to get credit for the time you put in. And I know, like, one of the things I know, you know, so we have this, you know, big center, right, you know, 20 students and you know, 6 statistics faculty, but some of my like mathematics colleagues, you know, we've started developing like a directed undergraduate research. So it's a class, right? It's like 6 students and you're doing research and it now, you know, counts as a class. So I think, you know, just really pushing on that to make sure that you should be, this is super valuable stuff that we're doing. It's something that all our colleges are promoting to prospective students. And so you should definitely be getting credit for the time and energy you put in.
Well, with that, I will thank our panelists for being so generous with their time and giving such great advice, and hope we actually, Kelly and I, have a vision of doing this kind of events a bit more periodically. So I'll invite you to stay tuned. And so I think my piece of advice is to, if you're not already a member of the section on statistics and data science education, join the section and reach out to your colleagues because they are indeed wonderful.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Don't hesitate to reach out.
Yes, please do. Thank you, Donna. That was great.